It was one of those bright, slow Saturdays that small-town America still managed to preserve sunlight spilling through elm trees. Children riding bikes near the gas station, and the faint hum of country music drifting from open car windows. The kind of day that didn't promise much, except peace. At the edge of the town of Maple Ridge stood Rosie's Diner, a place that hadn't changed in 40 years. Its silver walls gleamed under the noon sun, and its red neon sign buzzed softly. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and nostalgia. At the far window, facing Main Street, sat Frank Donovan. He was 72, a retired veteran of the Vietnam War, and a man who carried his years the way soldiers carry their medals, quietly, with weight and meaning. His left leg had been gone since 1971, replaced by a worn titanium prosthetic hidden beneath khaki pants. The rest of him, strong shoulders, steely eyes, and a face lined by both wisdom and loss, told the story of a man who'd seen too much but complained too little. Frank came to Rosie's every Saturday like clockwork. He ordered the same meal: black coffee, eggs over easy, and toast. The waitress, Linda, a woman in her 50s who had served him for years, always greeted him with the same gentle warmth. "Morning, Sergeant Doan," she said with a smile, setting his coffee down. "Morning, Linda," he replied, voice deep and calm. "Looks like another quiet day. Let's hope it stays that way," she said, tapping his shoulder lightly. Frank nodded, glancing out the window at the still street. He liked the quiet. He liked the routine. For men like him, routine meant stability, and stability meant safety. He'd had enough chaos for one lifetime. He adjusted the worn leather jacket draped over his shoulders. On its front, a few military patches were still stitched, one of them with a faded emblem of the Navy SEAL trident, though few ever noticed. He wasn't the type to boast. To most, he was just the old vet in the corner. But those who knew his story knew that Frank Donovan wasn't just a veteran. He had once been a legend among SEAL instructors, a man who'd trained elite teams in the 1980s and 90s. But here, in Maple Ridge, he was just another old-timer with a quiet smile. The bell over the diner's door jingled. A young couple came in, followed by a group of high schoolers laughing over something on a phone. The hum of conversation filled the air again. Frank sipped his coffee and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Then, in the distance, a sound that didn't belong. Engines, loud ones. At first, it was just a faint growl, like thunder too far to matter. But within seconds, it grew louder, deeper, heavier, the synchronized rumble of motorcycles. Frank's jaw tightened slightly. He turned his head toward the window, watching as the sound rolled closer until a pack of bikers turned onto Main Street. 8 of them, black leather vests, loud exhausts, and an attitude that seemed to drown out the calm afternoon. They rode in like they owned the place, circling the diner parking lot before shutting off their engines. Their laughter echoed, coarse, mocking. Linda stopped mid-step, eyes shifting nervously toward them. "Not from around here," she murmured. Frank didn't respond. He simply watched. Years of instinct told him something about this group wasn't right. They moved with a kind of confidence that comes from being feared, not respected. The bikers dismounted. Their leader, a burly man covered in tattoos, removed his helmet, revealing a jagged scar across his cheek and cold gray eyes that swept the diner's front windows. He grinned when he saw Frank inside, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The bell jingled again, and suddenly the noise of the motorcycles was replaced by the heavy clunk of boots. The bikers filled the doorway, one after another, their presence sucking the warmth out of the room. The diner fell silent. Frank didn't move. He'd been stared down by worse. The leader, Rex, looked around with an arrogant smirk. "Ain't this cozy?" he said loudly, his voice gravelly. Smells like bacon and boredom. No one replied. The bikers claimed the counter stools like they owned them. One of them snapped his fingers at Linda. Hey, sweetheart, 6 coffees, strong. She hesitated, but nodded, pouring nervously. Frank kept his gaze on his plate. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best defense was silence. But Rex wasn't the kind of man who liked being ignored. After a few moments, Rex turned toward Frank. Hey, old-timer, he called. You served, or you just like dressing up like one? The diner froze. Frank didn't look up. Served, he said simply. Rex chuckled. Yeah? Bet you were a paper pusher, huh? Not one of the real ones. Frank finally looked up, his eyes calm but piercing. I did my part. Something in his tone measured, unshaken, irritated Rex. He wanted a reaction. He got none. Rex stood up, swaggering toward Frank's table. His boots thudded against the linoleum. You think wearing medals makes you special? He sneered, staring down at the old man. Frank stared back, steady and quiet. No, he said softly. It reminds me of those who were. The room held its breath. Even the coffee machine seemed to fall silent. Rex's smirk faltered. He grabbed Frank's cap from the table, a faded navy hat with the seal insignia. Nice hat, he said mockingly, spinning it on his finger before tossing it onto the floor. Guess you don't need it anymore, huh? Linda gasped. Hey, that's enough. Rex turned on her, voice sharp. Stay out of it, lady. Frank looked at the cap lying on the floor, then up at Rex. His face didn't change. I fought for your right to be stupid, he said evenly. Don't make me regret it. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the diners, nervous, uncertain. Rex's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in a wheelchair. He leaned closer, his breath hot and sour. You want to try me, old man? Frank didn't blink. No, son. I've already fought the kind of men who'd eat you alive. For a second, Rex didn't know how to respond. There was something unnerving about Frank's calm, something that whispered danger without saying a word. Then Rex straightened up and laughed, slapping one of his buddies on the shoulder. Relax, boys. Just a grumpy war hero trying to sound tough. The bikers laughed, too, loud and cruel. Frank reached down slowly, picked up his cap, brushed it off, and placed it back on his head. His hands were steady, his expression unreadable. From a corner booth, a young man had been watching silently. Evan, mid-30s, short military haircut, plain clothes, but a posture that screamed discipline. He had recognized the name Donovan on the patch of Frank's jacket the moment he'd walked in. And now, as he watched Rex shove Frank's wheelchair slightly backward, spilling his coffee, something in him snapped. He pulled out his phone under the table, typed a short message, and sent it to a private contact list. Evan, they're messing with him. Rosie's Diner. Frank Donovan. He hit send. Then he stood up slowly, his eyes locked on the bikers. Frank caught his glance. A flicker of recognition passed between them. A silent understanding. Frank gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. Evan sat back down, pretending to drink his coffee. The message was already moving faster than anyone in the diner could imagine. Outside, the sunlight continued to glow over Maple Ridge, calm and warm. But inside Rosie's Diner, the air had changed. Because in exactly 20 minutes, peace would return, carried in by men who owed their lives to the quiet veteran now sitting in the corner. The smell of spilled coffee still lingered in the air. A dark puddle spread across the table where Frank's cup had been knocked over. The sound of laughter from the bikers cut through the silence of the diner like a jagged knife. Every customer sat frozen in place, their hands still, eyes darting nervously from the old veteran to the group of leather-clad troublemakers. Frank remained calm, but there was a storm building behind his steady gaze. Not anger, just patience being tested. He'd learned long ago that rage wasn't power. Control was. Rex, the gang leader, leaned against Frank's table, pretending to wipe imaginary dust off the veteran's shoulder. "Tell me something, old man," he said with a smirk. "What's a cripple like you doing in a hero's jacket? You think you're special because you've got a few shiny pins?" His crew snickered behind him. The waitress, Linda, stepped forward, trembling but determined. "You boys had your fun," she said, her voice shaking. "Why don't you just eat somewhere else?" Rex turned his head slowly, his cold eyes narrowing. "Did I ask you to talk?" She froze, fear spreading across her face. Frank's voice came low but firm. "Leave her out of this." Rex looked back, mock amusement spreading across his lips. "Oh, look at that. Grandpa's still got some bark left in him." He grabbed Frank's empty coffee cup and slammed it down on the table, hard enough to make the cutlery jump. "What were you, anyway? Logistics? Paperwork? Or one of those guys who carried bags for the real soldiers?" Frank's jaw clenched, but his tone remained steady. "I carried men, not bags." The laughter around the table faltered for a second. A flicker of doubt crossed Rex's face, but pride made him push further. "Yeah? Maybe you carried him out crying, huh?" He gave a mock salute. "Thanks for your service, Sergeant Wheelchair." Something inside the diner shifted. Even the air felt heavier. From the far corner booth, Evan's eyes narrowed. He could handle a lot, but not this. Not watching him being disrespected. He reached for his phone again, but before he could type another message, Frank gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of the head. "Not yet." Evan froze, understanding the silent command. Frank had been an instructor, his instructor. That meant he was always in control, even now. Rex reached out suddenly and flicked one of Frank's metal pins with his finger. "Pretty little trinkets. They sell these online, right?" The diner collectively held its breath. Linda's hand hovered over the phone near the counter, ready to call the police. Frank's voice, calm and unflinching, broke the tension. "You ever seen a friend die wearing one of these?" Rex's grin faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Frank said slowly, "these don't come from parades or online stores. They come from funerals. From men better than you'll ever be." A long, cold silence filled the room. For the first time, some of the bikers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Rex's pride was louder than his conscience. He sneered and shoved the table hard, making Frank's utensils clatter to the floor. "You talk too much, old man," he growled. Frank looked up at him steadily. "And you don't think enough." That made Rex snap. He stepped closer, towering over Frank's chair, his fists tightening. "You got a smart mouth for someone who can't even stand." Frank's reply came quiet, deliberate. "I stood long enough to defend your freedom." The words landed like a blow. For a brief moment, Rex's expression cracked, his bravado slipping. But his ego forced him forward. He reached down and grabbed Frank's shoulder, shaking him roughly. "You think you can talk to me like that?" The veteran's hand twitched toward his lap, not out of fear, but instinct. Decades of training still lived in his muscles. Evan started to rise from his seat, his body tense. The man next to him, an older trucker, grabbed his arm and whispered, "Don't, son. They'll hurt you." Evan's eyes stayed locked on Frank. Not if someone else gets hurt first. Rex was still talking, his words a blur of curses and insults. His voice got louder, his movements more aggressive. The other bikers were feeding off his energy, laughing, egging him on. "Hey Rex, maybe he wants another war." One shouted. "Yeah, maybe this time he'll win." Another added, laughing cruelly. Frank didn't react. He stared straight ahead, letting the insults bounce off him like rain on stone. Inside, his pulse remained steady. He'd faced worse enemies in jungles far from home, men who didn't just bark, but killed. And yet, something about this moment felt worse. It wasn't the danger. It was the disrespect. After a lifetime of sacrifice, to be mocked by boys who'd never known discipline, that was harder to bear than any bullet wound. Linda couldn't take it anymore. She slammed her order pad on the counter. That's it. I'm calling the sheriff. Rex turned, pointing a finger at her. You do that, and this place gets smashed up before they even arrive. Her hand trembled on the receiver. Frank's tone stayed low. You touch this place, you'll regret it. Rex spun back, his temper fully breaking. You threatening me, old man? No, Frank said. I'm warning you. For the first time, Rex hesitated. There was something unnerving about the quiet in Frank's voice, something that didn't match the frailty of his body. It was the voice of a man who'd seen death, delivered orders under fire, and survived where others hadn't. But before Rex could speak again, the diner door swung open. A family, a mother, father, and 2 kids, stepped in, laughing about something from the parking lot. The laughter stopped instantly when they saw the scene. The bikers, the spilled coffee, and the veteran in the wheelchair surrounded. The father frowned. Everything all right here? Rex smirked, stepping back slightly. Everything's fine, buddy. Just chatting with the hero. The man looked uncertain, but didn't push it. He guided his family to a booth at the back. Frank gave him a small nod of reassurance, and the man returned it, the kind of unspoken respect only some people understand. The tension simmered again. Outside, clouds began to drift over the sun, casting long shadows through the diner windows. The once bright room now felt closed in, as if the air itself was waiting. Rex leaned back against the counter, cracking his knuckles. You know what, boys? He said loudly. I think our friend here needs a little lesson in manners. The smallest of the bikers laughed nervously. Come on, Rex, he's old. Let it go. But Rex wasn't listening. He thrived on control, the power of being feared. And right now, he wanted the entire diner to know who held that power. He walked slowly behind Frank's wheelchair, gripping the handles. Frank said nothing. Let's see how fast this thing rolls, Rex whispered. He pushed hard. The chair jerked forward violently, the front wheel catching the edge of the table and toppling Frank's plate to the floor. Eggs and toast splattered across the tiles. Gasps filled the air. Linda screamed. Stop it. Frank caught the side of the table to steady himself. His prosthetic leg clanked against the metal footrest. He looked up at Rex. No fear, no panic, just quiet disappointment. Rex smirked. Guess you're not so tough after all. The room went silent again. Frank adjusted his cap and said softly, You're making a mistake, son. Rex laughed. Oh yeah? And what's going to stop me? You gonna call the army? Frank's lips curved slightly. Almost a smile, but colder. Something like that. From his booth, Evan's phone buzzed. A single text had come through from an unknown contact. Message received. ETA 20 minutes. He looked up, eyes meeting Frank's across the diner. The old man didn't move, didn't speak, but the calm in his face told Evan everything he needed to know. Help was coming. Outside, the faint sound of distant engines began to hum again, deeper, heavier, synchronized. Not the roar of chaos, but the rhythm of order. The kind that meant one thing. The storm was on its way. Evan sat perfectly still in the corner booth, phone in hand, heart pounding but face unreadable. The screen glowed softly under the dim diner lights. A message already sent to the men who would understand without needing details. It's Frank Donovan. Rosie's diner. He's being harassed. That was all it said. But for a small circle of people scattered across the county and beyond, those few words were enough to start a quiet chain reaction that would soon change everything. Outside, the afternoon sunlight was fading into amber hues. Long shadows stretched across the diner's parking lot as the sound of the bikers' laughter echoed through the air. Inside, the tension had turned the small-town comfort of Rosie's diner into a pressure cooker of unease. Evan watched as Rex leaned casually against the counter, drinking coffee like he hadn't just shoved a 72-year-old veteran across the floor. His crew was restless. One joked nervously. Another checked the clock. None of them realized that their 20 minutes of arrogance were already ticking down. Frank sat back in his wheelchair, his expression calm. His eyes were steady, scanning the room slowly. He noticed everything: exits, mirrors, the broken coffee cup on the floor. Years of training had carved those habits deep into his mind. He wasn't just a man in a diner anymore. He was a soldier reading the battlefield. Linda came over quietly with a towel, cleaning up the spilled coffee. Her hands trembled slightly. "Frank," she whispered, "please. Maybe you should just go home. I don't want this getting worse." Frank gave her a small, kind smile. "Linda, if I leave now, it teaches them they can scare people into silence. You know me better than that." She sighed, her eyes moist. "Yeah," she said softly. "I do." From across the room, Rex sneered. "Aw, isn't that sweet?" Grandma and Grandpa having a heart-to-heart. Laughter followed. One of the younger bikers, tall, with a patch that read Reaper's MC, tried to grin along, but his discomfort showed. "Hey, Rex," he muttered, "maybe we should just go. It's just some old vet. Not worth it." Rex shot him a glare that shut him up instantly. "You backing out now?" He growled. "Guy needs to learn not to mouth off." Frank said nothing. His silence was louder than any insult could have been. Outside, a truck roared down the main road, the deep growl of its diesel engine fading quickly into the distance. For anyone else, it was just background noise. For Evan, it was a reminder. Time was passing. He opened his phone again, typing fast. "Evan, status? Unknown contact. 4 inbound. Ada 15 minutes. Others on standby." A rush of relief flooded him. The message had reached the right people, men who didn't hesitate when it came to one of their own. He looked up again. Frank had noticed. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Frank gave him that same calm nod, the kind Evan remembered from training years ago. It wasn't just a nod. It was an order. Stay calm. Stay ready. Rex walked back toward Frank's table, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a show. "You ever wonder what it's like, old man?" he said mockingly. "You guys fought for freedom, right? That's what you all say. Funny thing is, we're free to do what we want now. Guess you did your job too well." Frank's tone was quiet, but sharp as glass. Freedom doesn't mean you get to take dignity from others. It means you respect it. The words hit Rex harder than he expected. He tried to laugh it off. "You got all that wisdom and still ended up in a chair. Don't sound so smart to me." Frank's hand brushed over the wheel rim, his knuckles pale. "This chair doesn't define me," he said. "But your choices are about to define you." The calm in his voice sent a ripple through the room. It wasn't a threat. It was prophecy. In a warehouse on the outskirts of town, a phone buzzed on a metal table. A man with a shaved head picked it up, reading the message in silence. His name was Chief Ryan Blake, active-duty Navy SEAL, team leader, and one of the many who had once trained under Frank Donovan years ago. He didn't need to ask questions. He just said one word to the men around him. Gear. No weapons. They didn't need them. They were off duty, but old instincts kicked in. They moved with purpose. Boots, jackets, helmets, and quiet efficiency. Within 2 minutes, 4 motorcycles and 2 pickup trucks were roaring down the empty roads toward Maple Ridge. Ryan's mind replayed every memory of training under Frank, the shouting, the sweat, the impossible drills, the lessons that had saved his life in combat more times than he could count. Donovan doesn't ask for help, he said to his team as they rode. If he's in trouble, it's because someone doesn't know who they're dealing with. The men exchanged grim smiles. They rode faster. Back at the diner, Rex had grown bored of mocking and started pacing. He poured himself another coffee without asking, spilling half of it on the counter. The other bikers were restless, shifting in their seats. The one who had spoken up earlier finally muttered, "Rex, come on, man. Let's just go. We got what we wanted." Rex turned sharply, eyes flashing. "What I wanted?" He snapped. "What I want is respect." He turned to Frank again. "And I'm gonna get it." Frank looked up slowly, his voice calm as ever. "Respect isn't taken, son. It's earned." Rex slammed his hand down on the table. "You think you're better than me because you wore a uniform?" Frank didn't answer. His eyes just met Rex's, quiet, steady, unflinching. For a moment, Rex felt something strange. Not fear exactly, something older, deeper. He looked into Frank's eyes and saw no anger, no panic, only conviction. The kind of calm that comes from having already faced the worst. Rex stepped back slightly, shaking it off, laughing too loud. "You're lucky I'm in a good mood, old man." He turned toward the door. "We'll finish this outside." The group followed him out, laughing and spitting as they went. Inside, the room finally exhaled. Linda leaned on the counter, shaking. "Frank," she whispered, "they'll be waiting out there." Frank adjusted his jacket, straightening the patch on his chest. "I know." Evans stood up. "Sir," he said quietly, his voice low but firm, "help's on the way." Frank gave him a faint smile. "Good. Let's hope they remember their manners." Outside, Rex lit a cigarette, blowing smoke into the cool evening air. The sound of cicadas filled the silence between the bikes. "He's got guts, I'll give him that," one of the bikers said. Rex grinned. "He's got a death wish." One of them checked his phone. "Hey, boss." Look, in the distance, faint but growing louder, came another sound, the deep synchronized roar of engines. Not the chaotic kind that the Reapers rode. This was smoother, cleaner, perfectly in rhythm. Rex squinted down the road. "More bikers?" The man shrugged. "Can't tell." The engines grew louder. The sound echoed off the buildings, powerful, confident, steady. Then headlights appeared, 4 black motorcycles riding in perfect formation, followed by 2 pickup trucks behind them. Every head in the diner turned toward the windows. Rex's grin faded. Inside, Evan checked his phone. A message flashed. "On site." Frank's lips curved into a faint smile. "Right on time," he murmured. Rex frowned, tossing his cigarette to the ground. "What is this?" The lead motorcycle came to a stop. The rider dismounted, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements smooth and precise. His jacket bore a small embroidered trident on the sleeve. He removed his helmet slowly, revealing sharp blue eyes and a calm expression. Ryan Blake stepped forward, looking around once, then straight into the diner window where Frank sat. He smiled, the same way a soldier smiles when he sees his commanding officer alive after all these years. "Afternoon, Sergeant," he said under his breath. "We got your message." He turned to his men. "Let's remind these boys what respect looks like." The engines cut off one by one, the sound fading into an eerie silence. The bikers shifted uneasily, hands twitching. Inside the diner, Frank finally lifted his coffee cup again. Linda had refilled it without a word and took a slow, deliberate sip. Then he whispered to himself, "And now the lesson begins." The air outside Rosie's diner was thick with tension. The golden evening light had dimmed into an amber haze, and the sound of cicadas was drowned by the low, synchronized hum of engines cooling off. 6 vehicles, 4 black motorcycles and 2 trucks, stood parked in a perfect V formation outside the diner. Rex and his gang, the self-proclaimed Reapers, exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time that day, their cocky smirks had faded. The men approaching didn't look like ordinary bikers. Their movements were sharp, precise, deliberate. Each step carried quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need words. Ryan Blake walked at the front, helmet tucked under his arm. His jaw was firm, his eyes calm but cold. The seal trident patch on his sleeve caught the dying light, and the moment Rex saw it, a small flicker of unease crept up his spine. He tried to hide it behind a laugh. "What's this?" he barked. "Back up for the old man? You boys Navy or some kind of biker club for senior citizens?" No one answered. Behind Ryan, the other men stood silently, strong, steady, watching everything. They didn't fidget. They didn't shout. They simply waited. The silence itself was suffocating. Inside the diner, Frank sat still, watching through the window. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "They came," he whispered. Linda, wiping her hands nervously with a towel, asked softly, "You know them?" Frank's eyes never left the window. "Trained half of them," he said quietly. "Ryan was one of my best." Outside, Rex stepped forward. His boots crunched on the gravel. "You hear me?" he said, puffing out his chest. "You don't scare me with your tough guy act." Ryan's gaze lifted, meeting his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. "I'm not here to scare you." Rex smirked. "Then what are you here for, Navy boy?" Ryan took a slow step closer. "To make sure you understand something your parents clearly failed to teach you, respect." A low murmur came from the Reapers. One of them snickered, but it died quickly when Ryan's gaze flicked toward him. Rex scoffed. "Respect? You showing up here like you own the place doesn't seem respectful to me." Ryan smiled faintly. "You think what you did in there was?" He nodded toward the diner, where through the glass, Frank's silhouette could be seen sitting motionless in his wheelchair. Rex's grin wavered. Old man should have kept his mouth shut. That was the wrong thing to say. Ryan's voice hardened, low and controlled. "That old man has more honor in his scars than you'll ever have in your whole life." He took another step forward. The distance between them was closing. Rex clenched his fists, but Ryan's team didn't move. They didn't need to. Their posture alone screamed discipline, years of combat instinct honed to perfection. "You boys think you're heroes?" Rex spat. "You think your little military act scares me?" Ryan tilted his head. "No," he said calmly. "Reality does that just fine." Inside the diner, Evan stood by the window, watching the confrontation unfold. His phone buzzed, a message from one of the SEALs. "Stay inside. Do not engage." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "They've got it handled," he whispered. Frank took a sip of his coffee, the clinking sound oddly steady amid the chaos outside. "They always do," he said softly. Linda turned toward him. "Frank, I don't understand. How do they even know you?" He smiled faintly, looking down at his calloused hands. "Years ago, when I was still in command, we trained young recruits to think, to act, to protect without ego. Ryan was one of them. He swore to always have his team's back. Looks like he meant it. Outside, the air grew colder. Rex, still desperate to hold his ground, barked a laugh. You think you can just show up here and tell me how to live? You don't know who I am. Ryan's lips tightened slightly. You're a bully who picked the wrong target. The biggest of the Reapers stepped forward, muscles bulging under his leather jacket. You better back off, he growled. Ryan didn't move. You don't want this fight, he said evenly. Why's that? The man sneered. Ryan's eyes flicked to the side. One of his men, a tall figure named Carter, took a single step forward, a kind of movement that instantly shifted the air. It wasn't threatening, just efficient, like a machine resetting. Carter said quietly, "Because we finish what we start." The biker hesitated. He could feel it, the controlled danger in the way these men stood. No one was posturing. No one was shouting. They simply existed like a storm waiting for a trigger. Rex tried again. This ain't the Navy, boy. You can't hide behind your uniform here. Ryan's voice turned quieter, deadlier. We don't need uniforms to do what's right. A tense silence fell. The sounds of crickets, the hum of streetlights, and the faint clink of a diner spoon were the only noises breaking it. Then Rex, trying to reclaim control, spat on the ground. You think you're better than us? Fine, let's see it. He shoved Ryan in the chest. The SEAL didn't flinch. He simply looked down at the hand that had touched him, then back up at Rex's face. Last warning, he said softly. Rex grinned. Make me leave. He swung. The punch connected, or rather it would have, had Ryan not sidestepped effortlessly. With a single fluid motion, Ryan caught Rex's wrist, twisted it downward, and stepped in close. Rex hit the ground hard, air bursting from his lungs as his own arm was pinned behind him. In less than 2 seconds, the leader of the Reapers was face down in the gravel, gasping. The other bikers froze. Ryan's team didn't move an inch. They simply watched, silent as sentinels. Rex tried to push up, but Ryan pressed a knee gently into his shoulder. You done? He asked quietly. Get off me. Rex growled, but the words were weak. Say it, Ryan said calmly. You're done. Rex spat again, his face red. Fine, he hissed. I'm done. Ryan released him and stood up, brushing dust off his hands like the whole thing had been nothing more than a simple task. Good choice. Inside, the diner crowd, a handful of locals who had watched the entire thing unfold through the glass, burst into hushed murmurs. Frank didn't move. He just watched, expression unreadable. Finally, he said, He's grown. Linda blinked. You mean Ryan? Frank nodded slowly. Didn't just learn how to fight. Learned how not to. Outside, Rex stumbled to his feet, embarrassed and humiliated. The other Reapers looked at him uncertainly, none daring to speak. His pride burned hotter than the scrape on his face. You think this is over? He snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Ryan. Ryan raised an eyebrow. It is if you're smart. Rex's jaw tightened. He looked around, at the silent SEALs, at the onlookers inside, at his own men who now avoided his gaze. Something in his defiance faltered. He kicked at the gravel and spat once more. Let's go, he muttered to his crew. They hesitated, then slowly mounted their bikes. The engines roared to life, breaking the heavy silence. Before leaving, Rex turned back one last time. Old man got lucky today, he said bitterly. Ryan didn't reply. He just stared, eyes cold and steady. The Reapers peeled out, their engines fading into the distance, until all that remained was the smell of exhaust and the soft chirping of night insects. Ryan turned back toward the diner. Through the window, Frank Donovan sat waiting, calm and proud. As Ryan walked in, The bell above the door jingled softly, the same way it always did, but this time it sounded like relief. Frank looked up and smiled faintly. "You're late," he said. Ryan grinned, a hint of emotion breaking through the soldier's composure. "Traffic." The room erupted in soft laughter. Linda wiped her eyes with a napkin, shaking her head. Ryan crouched beside Frank's wheelchair, his tone turning softer. "You okay, sir?" Frank nodded slowly. "Better now." "You did well." Ryan lowered his gaze respectfully. "You taught us how to handle things with honor." Frank's eyes twinkled. "And restraint." Ryan chuckled. "Still working on that part." Frank looked around the diner, the shattered calm now replaced by quiet admiration. "They'll remember this," he said. Ryan nodded. "Good. Maybe next time they'll think twice before picking on someone who served their country." Frank's hand rested on his shoulder. "No," he said gently. "Next time, maybe they'll just think before they act." Ryan smiled faintly, understanding. "Yes, sir?" The two men sat there for a long moment, mentor and student, soldier and soldier, past and present, while the small-town night settled around them. Outside, the last light faded from the horizon. The storm had passed, leaving behind the quiet peace that only comes after justice has been served with grace. Morning came slowly to Maple Ridge. The small town, usually quiet and content, woke up to whispers traveling faster than the sunrise. Everyone had heard about the fight at Rosie's diner, about the old veteran who stood his ground, and about the mysterious men who showed up out of nowhere and put the notorious Reaper's MC in their place. By the time the first customers trickled into the diner that morning, the booth where Frank Donovan usually sat had become something of a shrine. Linda had polished it twice before opening, even though Frank hadn't arrived yet. "Crazy night, huh?" said Hank, the mailman, as he slid into a counter stool. "Heard some of them bikers got run clean out of town." Linda gave a small, proud smile. "They learned a lesson they won't forget," she said, pouring him coffee. Hank chuckled. "And the seals? Where'd they come from?" She just shrugged. "Old friends." Outside, Frank's old blue pickup truck pulled up. He rolled himself out from the driver's seat, transferring into his wheelchair with practiced ease. The town had seen him do it 100 times, but today, people watched differently, with respect instead of pity. Inside, the moment Frank entered, conversation softened. Heads turned. Even the air seemed to settle. He gave a polite nod to everyone, rolling toward his usual booth. "Morning, Linda," he said, his voice even as ever. "Morning, Frank," she replied warmly. "How you holding up?" He smiled faintly. "Just another day, just another cup of coffee." She leaned closer. "Word travels fast, you know. They're calling you a hero again." Frank chuckled softly. "Last time they called me that, I ended up on a battlefield. Let's just stick to Frank, shall we?" She laughed, shaking her head. "You'll never change." He glanced toward the window, where sunlight streamed through onto the booth. "Let's hope not," he murmured. Down the street, in the sheriff's office, Sheriff Cole Simmons was already drowning in phone calls. The Reapers had left town overnight, some headed west, others scattering like dust in the wind. But they hadn't left quietly. Reports of property damage, vandalism, and threats had come in for months before this, but now, the town had reached its breaking point. Cole sighed, rubbing his temples as his deputy walked in. "We got statements coming in from half the county," the deputy said. Everyone saw something. Cole nodded slowly. "And the seals?" The deputy grinned. "They vanished before sunrise. No plates, no IDs, nothing. Just gone." Cole leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, that sounds about right." He looked out the window toward the diner. He'd known Frank for 20 years, knew about the limp, the quiet eyes that had seen too much. What he didn't know until last night was just how much. Meanwhile, in the next county over, a black SUV rolled down a rural highway. Ryan Blake sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses hiding his tired eyes. They'd driven all night, staying quiet most of the way. Finally, Carter spoke up. "You think he's okay?" Ryan nodded. "He's tougher than all of us combined." "Still," Carter said softly, "seeing him there like that, sitting in that chair, didn't feel right." Ryan turned to look out the window, the sunlight glinting off endless fields. "He's earned that chair 1,000 times over. Every scar he got for someone else." Carter said nothing. Ryan's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Frank, tell your boys thank you. You did good. Coffee's on me next time you're in town." Ryan smiled faintly. "He's fine," he said. "Better than fine." Back in Maple Ridge, as the morning crowd filled the diner, Evan, the young man who had sent the message that brought the SEALs, sat across from Frank. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "you really think they won't come back?" Frank looked thoughtful for a moment, then shook his head. "People like that, they live off fear. You take fear away, they lose their power." Evan nodded slowly. I can't stop thinking about last night. The way they walked in. The way everyone just froze." Frank chuckled softly. "That's not fear you saw, son. That's discipline. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard." He took a sip of his coffee. "Ryan learned that a long time ago. I only gave him the tools. You trained him?" Evan asked, eyes wide. Frank smiled faintly. "Not just him. Half of his team. Back before my legs gave out." Evan blinked. "You were a SEAL too?" Frank looked down, his voice dropping. "Once, a long time ago." He paused, memories flickering behind his steady eyes. Faces, laughter, loss, the kind of ghosts that never truly leave. "The uniform fades," he said finally, "but the duty doesn't." By noon, word had reached the local paper. A reporter named Sarah Mitchell, young, curious, and stubborn, walked into the diner with a notepad. "Mr. Donovan?" she said, approaching cautiously. "Can I ask you a few questions?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "Depends. You writing about the pie or the brawl?" She smiled nervously. "The brawl. People are calling it the diner showdown." He sighed, setting down his cup. "Catchy. Go ahead. Is it true you served in the Navy?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, a long time ago." "And that the men who came last night were Navy SEALs?" He smiled slightly. "They were friends. That's all. But they came fast," she pressed. "Like they were waiting." Frank's eyes twinkled. "When you build trust the right way, you don't need to call twice." She scribbled furiously, fascinated. "Do you think the Reapers will come back?" Frank shook his head. "If they're smart, they won't. But if they do, I'll be here." Sarah paused, then asked quietly, "Why didn't you fight back?" Frank looked down at his hands, his voice calm but heavy. "Because there's a difference between winning a fight and ending one." She looked up from her notes. "What do you mean?" "Violence teaches nothing," he said. "But standing your ground, that shows people what courage really looks like." Her expression softened. "You're not just a veteran, are you?" Frank smiled faintly. "No, ma'am. I'm just a man who's had enough of people forgetting what decency looks like." By evening, the diner had become a symbol. Strangers stopped by just to shake Frank's hand. The sheriff dropped in, thanked him quietly, and told him the Reapers had been flagged in 3 states. Linda hung a small sign near the counter that read, "Respect is served here." Frank pretended not to notice, but a small grin betrayed him. Evan helped wipe down tables after the rush. "You think life will ever go back to normal?" he asked. Frank looked out the window, the sunset painting the sky in soft red and gold. "Normal's overrated," he said. "I'll take peaceful." That night, when the diner closed, Frank sat alone at his booth, the soft hum of the neon sign reflecting off his coffee. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old, worn photograph. A team of young seals standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling, with the sea behind them. There was Ryan Carter and a younger version of himself, strong, unbroken, standing tall. He traced the edges of the picture with his thumb, then slipped it back into his pocket. The sound of boots echoed near the door. Ryan stood there, still in his jacket, smiling faintly. "Thought you'd be gone by now," Frank said. Ryan shrugged. "Couldn't leave without saying goodbye." Frank looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't have to come last night, you know." Ryan smiled. "You didn't have to teach us how to be men." Frank's eyes softened. "Guess we're even then." Ryan chuckled, then reached out his hand. Frank took it firmly. As Ryan turned to go, Frank called out, "Hey, Ryan." He stopped. Frank nodded toward the sign behind the counter. "Respect is served here. Good motto, huh?" he said. Ryan smiled. "Yeah," he said quietly. "One worth fighting for." Then he walked out into the night, the soft rumble of his motorcycle fading into the distance. Frank watched through the window until the taillight disappeared. Then he looked up at the stars, whispering to the memory of his fallen brothers, men who had fought beside him long ago. "Still keeping the peace," he murmured. "Just like we promised." And for the first time in years, Frank Donovan smiled, not the weary smile of an old soldier, but the peaceful one of a man who had finally come full circle. The rumble of engines echoed off the canyon walls as the SEALs' bikes tore through the desert highway. The wind whipped at their faces, carrying dust and tension in equal measure. Travis rode at the front, his jaw clenched, eyes hidden behind black aviators. The others followed in tight formation steel, and leather moving as one. Each of them had seen combat in foreign lands, but tonight they were bringing that discipline home. What had started as a moment of cruelty against an old veteran was now becoming a reckoning. At the diner, chaos still simmered beneath the surface. The bikers, members of a ruthless gang called the Vultures, had resumed their rowdy laughter after tossing Walter's folded wheelchair into the mud. Their leader, a bulky man known as Razor, leaned back in his chair, tattooed arms spread wide, beer in hand. "No one's coming for you, old man," he sneered across the room. "This town belongs to us now." Walter sat quietly at the corner table, bruised but unbroken. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes burned with something fierce, a soldier's pride that time could not erase. The waitress Ellie hovered nearby, her face pale. She had already called the sheriff twice, but there was no sign of help. The gang had connections. No one wanted to cross them. Outside, the low growl of engines began to build again, faint but growing closer. Ellie's eyes flicked to the window. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The sound was unmistakable motorcycles, but these weren't the Vultures. These were faster, smoother, disciplined. Razor glanced outside, annoyed. More riders? They better not be thinking about crashing my night. He pushed his chair back with a thud. The rest of his crew stood, cracking knuckles, smirks forming on their faces. Then the first headlight cut through the dark. Then another, and another. 8 bikes rolled to a stop in front of the diner, their engines idling like a growl before a strike. The men dismounted slowly, boots hitting the gravel in sync. They were all in dark riding gear, patches of a trident and anchor stitched into their vests. Travis removed his helmet last, revealing a hard expression and eyes that glinted like steel. Ellie's breath caught. "Who are they?" Walter looked up slowly. A ghost of a smile appeared on his weathered face. "They're brothers," he murmured. Travis pushed open the diner door. It creaked loudly, slicing through the silence. Every biker inside turned toward him. "Evenin'," he said, voice calm but heavy with authority. "Heard there was some trouble here." Razor sneered, taking a step forward. "This ain't your business, soldier boy. Best keep ridden." Travis glanced at Walter, then back to Razor. "That man served this country when most of you couldn't even serve a shift at a gas station. You just made it my business." The room tensed. A single beer bottle dropped, shattering on the floor. Razor laughed, but the sound was hollow. "You think you can scare us with your pretty uniforms? We run this town." Travis didn't flinch. "You don't run anything anymore." Then, like a switch flipping, the SEALs spread out 5 men, moving with military precision, flanking the gang. Razor blinked, unsure whether to fight or flee. He'd seen violence, but never this kind of confidence. These weren't ordinary men. They moved like a unit that had survived wars. One of the SEALs, a tall man with a scar across his neck, spoke in a calm tone. "You have 2 choices. Walk out of here, apologize to that veteran, and never show your faces again, or we'll escort you out another way." The silence that followed was suffocating. The vultures looked at their leader. Razor clenched his fists, his ego warring with his instincts. Finally, he spat on the floor. "You don't tell me what to do." Travis sighed softly. "Didn't think you'd say that." What followed was swift, precise, and brutal, not chaos, but choreography. The SEALs didn't attack like brawlers. They moved like operators. Razor swung first, his fist flying toward Travis, but the SEAL sidestepped, caught his wrist, and flipped him over the counter with one clean motion. The sound of breaking glass echoed as beer spilled across the floor. The rest of the vultures tried to rush the SEALs, but it was over before it began. Each man was met with a calculated response: an elbow to the ribs, a twist of the arm, a knee strike that sent one crashing into a booth. Within a minute, 6 bikers were on the ground groaning, clutching bruised ribs and dislocated shoulders. Travis stood tall, breathing steady. Razor groaned on the floor, his bravado gone. The SEAL looked down at him. "Now, apologize." Razor's pride broke. He turned to Walter, voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Walter nodded slightly. "That's a start." Travis motioned to his men, and they released their holds. The bikers stumbled toward the door, dragging their wounded pride with them. Razor hesitated one last time at the doorway, glaring over his shoulder. "You'll regret this." Travis tilted his head. "Already did my regretting overseas." "You're not on that list." The door slammed shut behind them. For the first time that night, the diner was quiet. Ellie exhaled a shaky breath. "Who are you people?" Travis turned to her and gave a faint smile. "Just friends of a friend." He approached Walter's table. The old veteran looked up, emotion filling his eyes. "You didn't have to do that, son." Travis knelt down beside him. "You fought for us long before we ever could. We just paid it forward." The 2 men exchanged a firm handshake, one forged in different eras of war, but bound by the same brotherhood. Outside, the night air felt lighter. The SEALs helped Walter outside, retrieving his wheelchair from the mud. They wiped it clean, adjusted the seat, and made sure it rolled properly. As they prepared to leave, Walter looked out at the desert horizon. "Didn't think I'd ever see soldiers like you again," he said softly. Travis smiled. "We're everywhere, sir. You just have to call." And as the bikes roared to life again, the town watched from behind curtains and windows awed silent, grateful. For 20 long minutes, cruelty had ruled the night. But in the end, justice arrived on two wheels. The seals rode off into the darkness, their taillights glowing like distant embers, fading into the horizon, leaving behind not heroes who demanded praise, but men who simply did what was right. Walter watched until the last echo of engines disappeared, then whispered to himself, "Once a soldier, always a soldier." The night after the diner confrontation, the town of Red Hollow slept lighter than usual. Windows glowed late, doors stayed bolted, and whispers of what had happened spread faster than the desert wind. Word had it that a team of Navy SEALs had rolled through town, defended an old disabled veteran, and vanished just as suddenly. Some called them ghosts. Others called them angels on motorcycles. But Razor and his gang weren't gone. Not yet. Far outside town, under the flicker of a dying neon sign that marked an abandoned gas station, Razor sat on the hood of a dented pickup truck, a half-empty bottle in hand, and a fire burning behind his eyes. His knuckles were bruised, his pride worse. Around him, the vultures grumbled and cursed, nursing injuries both visible and invisible. The silence between them was heavy, until Razor finally growled, "They made us look weak." In our town, one of his men shifted uneasily. "Boss, those weren't just bikers. They moved like soldiers." "Yeah?" Razor sneered, tossing the bottle into the dirt. "And what are we gonna tell people? That a bunch of war heroes kicked our asses? You think anyone's gonna respect us after that?" He stood, pacing like a caged wolf. "No, we take that respect back. Tonight." The gang murmured in agreement. There was one rule Razor lived by: never let humiliation go unanswered. Meanwhile, miles away, Travis and the SEALs sat around a campfire near the canyon's edge. The night was calm, and the air smelled of sagebrush. They had taken a break before heading back to base, what was supposed to be their last night in Red Hollow. "Think they'll come back?" one of the men asked, tossing a pebble into the fire. Travis didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the flames, the reflection dancing in his eyes. "They're angry," he finally said. "Men like that don't swallow pride easily. My guess they'll come looking for payback." Another SEAL smirked. "Then they'll find it, again." Travis gave a faint, grim smile. "Yeah, but let's make sure the town doesn't pay the price for it." At that very moment, in the quiet streets of Red Hollow, Walter sat by his small apartment window, watching the stars. His body ached, but his spirit felt renewed. For years he had been invisible, just another forgotten veteran fading into the background. Now he felt seen again, reminded that brotherhood never dies. But deep down, a part of him sensed the calm wouldn't last. His phone buzzed on the table. It was Ellie, her voice shaky. "Mr. Walter, I think you should know. The vultures are back in town." Walter's heart skipped. "How many?" "Too many," she whispered. "They've been circling Main Street for 20 minutes. They're looking for someone." Walter didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, wheeled himself to the door, and called the one number he hoped he'd never have to use again. Travis answered on the first ring. "I was just about to call you," he said calmly. "We're on our way." By the time the SEALs rolled back into town, the streets were chaos. The vultures had gathered in front of the diner, engines roaring, headlights flashing like wild eyes. Razor stood in the middle of the road, holding a steel chain, his gang shouting behind him. Windows shattered as bottles flew, and the once quiet town turned into a war zone. Travis stopped his bike at the end of the street. He removed his helmet slowly, eyes locked on Razor. "Didn't learn your lesson, huh?" Razor grinned. "You embarrassed me, soldier. Now I'm going to return the favor." The SEALs dismounted, calm and deliberate. No words were needed between them. Years of training had built a silent language, the flick of a hand, the tilt of a head, the subtle shift of stance. They spread out, forming a barrier between the gang and the diner. Walter watched from the shadows, heart pounding. He wanted to stop them, to say it wasn't worth it, but he knew these weren't ordinary men. They weren't looking for violence. They were looking for justice. Razor swung his chain with a metallic hiss. No uniforms. No orders. Just you and me. Travis took a step forward. You're right. No rules. Then the fight erupted like thunder. Engines roared, tires screeched, and fists flew. Razor charged first, swinging the chain toward Travis's head. The seal ducked, countered with a quick strike to the ribs, and sent Razor sprawling backward. Two of the gang lunged at another seal, only to be disarmed with military precision. Another tried to swing a bat, but got caught mid-motion, his weapon twisting out of his hands before he hit the ground. The vultures were wild, relying on brute force and chaos. The seals were disciplined, every movement measured and efficient. Within minutes, the gang was on the defensive again. But Razor wasn't finished. He scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from his nose. You think you can just roll into my town and tell me how to live? He spat. Travis stared him down. This isn't your town. It belongs to people who respect it. Razor lunged again, this time drawing a hidden knife from his boot. The blade glinted under the streetlight as he slashed forward. Travis narrowly dodged, the knife grazing his jacket. The seal caught Razor's arm, twisted it, and the blade clattered to the ground. In one swift motion, Travis disarmed him completely and pinned him to the asphalt. The chain fell beside him, coiled like a defeated snake. You had your chance, Travis said quietly. The rest of the seals rounded up the remaining vultures, tying their hands with zip ties. Sirens wailed in the distance, the sheriff finally showing up after realizing this wasn't a fight he could ignore. When the police arrived, they found the gang lined up against the wall, groaning but alive. Razor glared at Travis as he was handcuffed. You think this changes anything? He hissed. There'll always be people like me. Travis looked at him calmly. Maybe, but as long as there are people like us, you'll never win. The sheriff, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, approached cautiously. Heard stories about you folks, he said quietly. Didn't believe them until tonight. Travis gave a nod. Just doing what's right. Walter rolled up beside them, his eyes wet with emotion. You did more than right, son. You gave this town its backbone back. As dawn crept over Red Hollow, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, the seals stood together one last time. The diner sign flickered weakly behind them, a symbol of something reclaimed dignity, safety, and respect. Ellie stepped outside, holding a cup of coffee for Travis. Guess you're leaving again? She asked softly. He nodded. We always do, but you'll come back? Travis smiled faintly. If we're needed. The engines roared to life once more, echoing across the waking desert. The seals rode off into the sunrise, a trail of dust following in their wake. Walter watched from his wheelchair, saluting silently as the bikes disappeared beyond the horizon. The town was safe again for now. But deep down, he knew the world was full of razors, full of men who thrived on fear and power. Still, he smiled, because somewhere out there, there were also men like Travis and his brother's silent guardians who didn't need medals or applause, just a purpose. And in that balance, he found peace. The morning sun stretched over Red Hollow like a promise, painting the town in warm gold. After the chaos of the previous night, the streets were quiet again. Residents peeked out of their windows, nodding to neighbors, murmuring about what had happened. The vultures were gone, cuffed and humiliated, and the town could finally breathe. Walter Donovan rolled slowly down Main Street in his wheelchair, passing the diner he had called home for decades. The sign above the door, flickering in the soft light, now seemed like a beacon. Respect is served here. The phrase, once a simple motto, had transformed into a testament of resilience. Inside the diner, Linda and the other staff bustled quietly, cleaning and setting tables. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread, normalcy returning with each small task. But nothing felt quite ordinary anymore. The entire town had witnessed courage and honor take a physical form. Walter stopped in front of the diner, resting for a moment. He inhaled the crisp morning air, savoring it like a soldier, savoring victory after a long campaign. Despite the bruises, the back pain, and the wheelchair, he felt alive in a way he hadn't for years. News of the confrontation had spread beyond Red Hollow. Social media erupted with footage captured by residents' short videos of motorcycles, precise movements, and the moment Razor and his gang were subdued. Even national news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a real-life tale of heroism and justice. Travis and his SEAL team, who had vanished once more, watched from afar. They remained faceless legends, silent protectors. But even they couldn't help noticing the ripple effect. Messages poured in, letters, emails, and social media posts from veterans, ordinary citizens, and families inspired by the story. People wrote about courage, standing up for others, and the power of silent guardianship. Back in Red Hollow, the sheriff's office received dozens of calls, most from citizens wanting to thank the unknown heroes. Sheriff Cole Simmons leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a smile. "I've seen a lot in my career," he said to his deputy, "but this reminds me why we protect our towns. Sometimes heroes show up in the strangest ways." Walter returned to the diner, where Linda handed him a cup of coffee. He sat at his usual booth, the bruises on his arms and face still visible, a badge of what he had endured. The town's new respect was palpable, not pity, not fear, but genuine admiration. Ellie slid into the seat across from him, placing a small tablet on the table. "I recorded some of the events," she said nervously. "People are watching. People are talking." You're famous now." Walter chuckled softly. "Famous isn't what matters," he said. "But if it makes people remember what courage looks like, maybe it's worth something." Ellie smiled. "I think it's worth a lot more than that. Veterans are reaching out. Some, they say they feel seen again. Like someone finally understands what they went through." Walter felt a warmth spread through him. For decades, he had been one of the invisible ones, a man whose service and sacrifice were mostly forgotten. But now, he realized that the ripple effect of his courage, amplified by the SEAL's intervention, was changing lives. The following week, reporters and journalists swarmed Red Hollow. Among them was Sarah Mitchell, the young journalist who had first tried to interview Walter. She sat across from him at the diner, notebook in hand, a respectful distance maintained. "Walter," she said gently, "people all over the country are inspired by your story. They want to know, what was going through your mind last night when the vultures cornered you?" Walter paused, his eyes steady. "I thought about duty," he said. "Not mine, not theirs, but our duty to one another. I've seen war. I've seen the worst humans can do. But I've also seen the best. And last night, the best showed up when it mattered most." Sarah scribbled notes quickly. "And the SEALs?" "They were my students once," Walter said softly. "I trained them years ago. They learned how to fight, yes, but more importantly, they learned how to protect, how to choose right over easy. That's why they came." Sarah looked up, awed. "So, you've been part of shaping heroes?" Walter nodded. "We're all shaped by someone. I just got lucky enough to see it come full circle." That evening, Red Hollow organized a small ceremony in front of Rosie's diner. A banner hung from the building, honoring courage and brotherhood. The townspeople gathered, clapping, cheering, and even bringing flowers and homemade banners. Local children waved handmade flags, some decorated with drawings of motorcycles and stars. Walter, in his wheelchair, was wheeled to the center. Sheriff Simmons handed him a folded American flag. "For service, for courage, for showing this town what honor looks like," he said, voice thick with emotion. Walter's eyes glistened. "Thank you," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But this isn't just about me. This is about every person who stands when it's hard to stand, who protects when it's easier to look away. Last night, those men did that. They reminded me, and all of us, that bravery isn't about age or strength. It's about heart." The crowd cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes. Local veterans saluted, children clapped, and even the few who had once doubted Walter's abilities nodded in quiet respect. News crews recorded the ceremony, broadcasting Walter's words to millions. Across the country, veterans called their families to share pride. Communities were reminded of the ideals that had built the nation: courage, respect, and standing up for one another. The story became more than a local tale. It became a symbol. Back at the diner, as the last of the crowd trickled away, Linda cleaned the counters. Walter sipped his coffee, quietly observing. Ellie came over with the tablet, showing messages from strangers. "Thank you. You inspire me. I will stand up now." Walter smiled faintly. "See? Sometimes the smallest actions ripple the farthest." Travis and his SEAL team, watching from afar through shared footage, allowed themselves a moment of pride. They had intervened to protect one man, but the impact had spread far beyond that. Quietly, they rode off again, like shadows, knowing their work wasn't about recognition, but about making the right choice when it counted most. Weeks later, Walter received a letter. No return address, just a simple note inside. "Your courage inspired us all. Never forget that age and circumstance do not define heroism." Travis and team. Walter folded it carefully, placing it in his jacket pocket. That night, he sat by his window, looking out at the desert stars. For decades, he had fought battles that few could imagine. And now, at the twilight of his life, he realized something profound. The fight wasn't about victory, it was about legacy. The SEALs, the town, the nation, they had all witnessed something that night. A story of courage, mentorship, and the quiet strength of one man who refused to be intimidated. And in that, Walter Donovan found peace. He whispered into the still night, voice soft but steady, "I did my duty." Now it continues in them. A cool breeze swept through Red Hollow, carrying with it the sense of closure, the calm after, the storm, and the unshakable truth that true courage never dies. It spreads, it inspires, it protects. Epilogue. The ripple effect over the next months. Red Hollow became a symbol for standing up against intimidation. The vultures disbanded, their reputation shattered. Local law enforcement reported a significant drop in gang activity. Veterans. Organizations used Walter's story to teach resilience, courage, and mentorship. And though Travis and his SEAL team never returned to claim recognition, their actions, combined with Walter's steadfast courage, became a legend whispered across the country. That even in the quietest towns, the bravest hearts rise to protect the defenseless. Walter Donovan's legacy, forged in service, battle, and resilience, had become eternal. The end.